Thank you, friends. You may be seated. Before we begin, I just want to ask everybody, gentle reminder, if we have a cell phone, if we could take please a moment to turn on silent, not to disturb the sacred funeral service. Finishing our service for Mr. Stanley P. Sklar of blessed memory is Cantor Kevin McKenzie of this congregation, Congregation B'nai Joshua, Beth Elohim. The cantor will now approach the family to do the ancient act of Kriya.
Esainai eleharim me'ain yavo ezri. Esainai eleharim me'ain yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. Today, we gather to honor the life of Stanley Sklar, a man whose presence touched so many and whose legacy is filled with love, loyalty, and humility. Now, I want you to look around. Everyone you see here is here because of Stanley's light, which moved all of you in meaningful ways. And in fact, everything you see in this building exists because of Stanley's light. Stanley was a stalwart supporter of BJBE. He helped, and in fact, he was instrumental on the building committee of BJBE with the legal parts of getting this space at 1201 Lake Cook with Steve Kikoler. And not only that, he also came back to help with the construction of this very sanctuary, working with Arlene Mazow, the executive director at that time. His legacy will continue within these walls forever. And we would all not be here, quite literally, today without Stanley Sklar. To give a quick introduction, as Dan will speak more later, Stanley lived a life full of love, gratitude, and integrity. He was devoted to those he cared about, steadfast in his beliefs, and above all, he was a good man. He was a true mensch. Stanley's story begins in Brooklyn, where he grew up facing many challenges. From a young age, he worked at a corner grocery store, learning the value of hard work, and perseverance. These early experiences shaped the man he became, resilient, determined, and proud of his humble beginnings. As many of you may have often heard, he used to say, "Not bad for a grocer's son," reflecting both his humility, but also his pride and how far he'd come and all he had accomplished. And Stanley also had a love of music. His love for music extended from the Chazanut of Yossele Rosenblatt to his wife Sandra's singing, whom he also called his bride frequently, but also to the famous cantor Billy Joel, thanks to some convincing from Dan. But at the same time, not so far as to rock music. That may have been a little too far. But it was his dedication to the community and those he loved, as well as music. He went on to excel as a lawyer in Chicago, specializing in construction law, where he built a reputation for being personable, responsible, and deeply committed to his profession. He gave back to his legal community with the same generosity and commitment that he gave to those he loved. His loyalty extended beyond his work, radiating into all aspects of his life. To his family, to his beloved Sandy, whether related his family, whether related by blood or not, and even to the places that he gave his business, like Max and Benny's, United, Hertz. His connections ran deep, and his friendships, many of which spanned decades, were marked with loyalty, care, and a nurturing spirit. And despite a rough childhood, and a lot of the challenges that he faced, his life was defined by gratitude. He never forgot his roots, nor did he take for granted the blessings of his later years. He took pride in living out the American dream. He understood the value of failure. He knew how to fail successfully, and after all, he was an engineer before he was a lawyer. He relied on his education, hard work, and trial and error, which really enabled him to thrive. And in turn, he made sure to educate his kids and his grandkids to care for everyone who was in his circle. And what truly defined Stanley was his authenticity. He was real, pragmatic, and knew how to get the job done. His legacy lives on in the hearts of all who knew him, and his presence, like the music he loved so much, will continue to bring comfort and peace to those who are lucky enough to know him. May his memory be forever a blessing. Amen. Now I'd like to invite up our rabbi cantors to come up and join me.
Hashkifeinu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu lechayim Hashkifeinu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu
V'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. U'shmor tzeiteinu u'voeinu l'chaim u'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Hashivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom v'hamidenu shomreinu
I'd now like to invite up Sam Sklar, one of Stanley's grandkids, to say a few words.
Just have a few things to say about my grandfather. For those that don't know, I was Stanley's first grandson, first grandkid. And with that, he entrusted me with the responsibility of the rest of them, which I took very personally. Ever since I was born, I had a special relationship with my grandfather. He'd come over, we'd do projects together, those kinds of things. Above all else, he loved all of us, and he loved nothing more than spending time with us on vacation or various travel trips. The one that I wrote down to talk about was a cruise that we went on about 10 years ago, where with all of them, and we were at, I forgot which island we were at, and Puerto Rico maybe, and my grandfather had had enough of whatever we were doing, and I had had enough too, and so we decided to go back to the boat, and we sat on the balcony, and it started torrential downpouring, and these guys all, with I think Ari in a stroller, running down the pier trying to get to the boat, and my grandfather and I were dry, and it's one of my better memories. Apart from that, he's a very stubborn guy. When he found something that he liked to do, he stuck to it. When he found a company he stuck to it. I sort of inherited some of those traits from him. Amongst many others. I'll be grateful forever for his support for Ava and I through some tough times that we had over the last 15 years. He never dropped a beat. He would always come and pick us up from school or from my dad's place or my mom's place, wherever we needed to be, he helped us out. And he took a particular interest in making sure that Ava and I were going to be okay and that things would turn out to be okay, and they did. I will miss him and his phone calls and his emails. He would definitely send you a follow-up email if you didn't respond within about 3 minutes, as well as a follow-up phone call if you didn't respond to your phone call in 3 minutes. So I will miss that, and I will miss his love for all of us, and yeah.
Now, Ava Sklar, if you'd like to come up.
He was a one-of-a-kind grandpa. Some things I will always remember about him are his quirks, or as I call them, his Stanley specials. They were what made him so special and unique. My most memorable one was his one-liners. I could never get enough of them and would burst out laughing anytime I would hear one. My favorite one would be a $1.380, which reminds me of the time he asked me what it meant, knowing I had no clue, just to stump me, and it was a classic grandpa move. It's a Sklar rite of passage to sit for hours upon hours pondering what it means. Or his spiel about how there are 2 seasons in Chicago, winter and construction, which of course he was never wrong about. Or I would knock on the door at Charlemagne, and he would open up and tell me all deliveries were in the back, please. At first it would annoy me that my grandpa was holding me back from getting to my toys, but the more I think about it, it was nice to give him a big hug and a kiss as I walked in the door. My other favorite quirk about him was his obsession with how things were done. Nothing like eating your breakfast at Charlemagne and having your cereal poured out of a plastic container, because he didn't want anyone to forget when the cereal expired, so he made sure to cut the top of the box off and also label it so it wouldn't get mixed up. Also, food going bad was so important to him. When we went out to eat and the takeout was sitting in the fridge, it couldn't be there for more than 3 days. Day 3 came around, he would always go, "Sandra, are you still eating this?" Her response would be yes, but Grandpa knew better. He knew that the food wouldn't get eaten. We would always joke at the restaurants if the food would be eaten as leftovers, and without a doubt it wasn't. Grammy's always ordered with her eyes and not her stomach, and Grandpa would never get in the way of that as much as the leftovers annoyed him. Even with all his quirks, I loved him so much. What I would do to get another fireman's carry out of the house, or to look at the cutout TV guide together and take a while to decide what to watch. His personal favorite to opt for was the local news channel so we could yell at the TV about all the chaos going on in the world, or his Big Bang Theory. I miss you so much, Grandpa. Tell Grammy I say hi and hope you enjoy your breakfast with your bagels and lox together again up there.
And now, Ari, if you'd like to say a few words, please come up.
I think my earliest memory of my grandpa was when I was about 5 or 6 old. It was a minor dispute in between my grandfather and myself, and I'd asked him to tell me the price of a toy he had bought me. He replied with this classic, $1.380, and I was perplexed to say the least. I asked him, "What does that mean?" He responded, "It's just $1.380. I wouldn't have it. In typical Sklar fashion, I threw a tantrum, not when I didn't understand something, and after what had to be 20 minutes of crying, I finally cracked my family members, and they told me, it was a made-up number. It was one of his mannerisms. And most of my childhood, that was the formatting of interactions I had with him. We had little moments, we made dumb jokes, played cards, exchanged stories, etc. But in the last 5 years, there were a lot of, 30-second calls, and I deeply regret not talking to him more often and more thoroughly. But it really wasn't. It wasn't until our trip to Chicago recently, in late August, that I connected with him on a deeper level. We sat down with him outside of Tamarisk, and we had Shabbos dinner. We all told him what was going on in our lives. He talked about Bud, and he talked about Biko, and I decided to tell him about the summer chemistry course that I was taking. I started talking about a specific lab that we were doing, which involved the titration of potassium permanganate. And I remember he also talked about a similar lab that he did in college. And he started opening up to me about all the engineering stuff that he had done before he decided to become a lawyer. And that really stuck out to me because I plan on going down the same track. And we both had trouble titrating potassium permanganate. I loved my grandfather a lot. And I just wish I had talked to him more.
Thanks, Cantor. It was lovely to meet you today, and I know that Bidgeby is in great musical hands with you. I was a little torn today. I'm wearing a tie. My father would be so upset that I was wearing a tie, but my mother would be so upset if I wasn't, so, she always won. We human beings, we're so uncomfortable with silence, especially in the presence of others, most especially in the presence of others who are in mourning. We don't know what to say. And so we say pithy words that practically roll off the tongue and are hardly soothing sentiments in an effort to fill the space, to fill the silence with the sound of our own voices, to quiet our own sense of unease. Time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. God doesn't give us more than we can handle until we can't. He's in a better place, but I wanted him in this place. Your parents are together at last. Yeah, that's true. That's undeniably true. That's why we're here today. I stand here before you, but I represent my brother as well in trying to present a picture of our father, the man he was, the role model, the mensch of mensches, and what really made him tick. I also want to acknowledge the beautiful emails that many of you sent, family, friends, and colleagues. That word mensch came up again and again, and it is an apt description. Our father was a good man. He was a kind man. He was a complicated man. You all knew different facets of him, but unless you knew the whole story, you didn't really understand who he was and where he came from. I'd like to help with the composite sketch, and I apologize in advance for my own presumptuousness and my own feeble attempt to do justice to the life and times of Stanley P. Sklar. SPS. His initials are more recognizable to me than his own name. In an era when lawyers distinguished themselves by the look, the fit, and the finish of their briefcase, my father eschewed fashion and preferred the ruggedness and practicality of a cloth LL Bean shoulder bag that bore his embroidered initials SPS. That bag was my father's rosebud. Apologies for the young ones in the room who know not from the Orson Welles classic Citizen Kane, but as I said, my father was a complicated man, and the LL Bean bag is the key to unlocking the door. My father's parents, Linda's parents, they were first-generation Polish immigrants who came to the Lower East Side of Manhattan and would settle and make a family in East New York, Brooklyn. Glenmore and Williams, to be exact. My father called Brooklyn the old country, and anyone who was born and raised there at that time was a landsman who understood in their very DNA what it meant to be from Brooklyn. Stoop ball, egg creams with Fox's You Bet syrup, and real seltzer bottles. Thomas Jefferson High School. Hardship and poverty, yes, but a complete unawareness that this was a hardship and poverty. That was adult stuff. That was immigrant stuff. My father became a bar mitzvah on a Thursday, and they gave him a belt of Schlivovitz and some creamed herring after the service, and he bolted from the doors of the Orthodox Hebrew school. He never looked back. That was the old-time religion. That was his parents' religion. My grandparents spoke Yiddish, but they never taught it to the children because they wanted to raise fully assimilated, acculturated American Jews. Not Jewish Americans. The ball cap, not the skull cap, preferably bearing the logo of the Brooklyn Dodgers. This was the backdrop. This set the scene for the person who was my father. It was like some Neil Simon play, only it was real. My grandfather owned a corner grocery store, and it was a hard life. My father helped tend the store. He would wake up at the crack of dawn to help open up the store before heading off to school. And he hated that store. He hated it like it was a living, breathing being. All he wanted was to be a kid. And here he was, dragged into the adult world of a 7-day work week on top of school. Can you imagine? Did I mention they lived in the back of the store? And that was when he had it good. One day, like a bolt from the blue, his father, Hyman, dropped dead in his late 40s, and Brooklyn would become a place of memory. My grandmother, Ray, and my father were left to close up the store and to close out the accounts. My father's sister, Linda, was old enough to remember the tumult and the move, but hopefully not the stigma and the shame. In those days, a corner grocery had its regulars, and it operated on a chit system of family accounts. You didn't pay for an item at the time of purchase. You could put it on the family chit sheet, and you would pay at the end of the month. When my grandfather died, my grandmother and my father had to go door to door and settle the accounts to be able to afford closing up the store and moving in with relatives in a distant and foreign land, Chicago. One painful memory from my grandmother, my father, was trying to settle an account and being chased from the door by a woman and her threatening broom. It was humiliating, but it forged my father's personality and resolve, and it lit the fire in him, longing for a better life, for himself, for his family, for his children. He was now fatherless and rudderless, living in a cramped Chicago apartment with relatives he barely knew and looking after his kid sister, who was 11 years his junior. Like it or not, he was now the man of the house, even if that house was actually an apartment that belonged to his aunt. Complicated dynamics for anyone, let alone a high school senior who finished out his senior year at Thomas Jefferson before joining his mother and sister in Chicago. If you understand this part of his life, then you understand why he hated that store, why he had unresolved issues with his father who died too young. And his father lamented the fact that he had little more than a high school education and a Polish accent. Why he hated cats. You see, they had a cat on sentry duty at the grocery store. It was practical. The cat kept mice away, but he hated the animal that represented the store, and he hated cats for life. But a new life was unfolding in Chicago. At first, my father flirted with the idea of becoming an engineer, as we heard from Ari. This must make my brother practically choke on his own laughter at the thought of it. My father soon realized that this was not the path for him. He went to the University of Navy Pier before it was the tourist attraction it is today. In fact, the site of Chicago's Shakespeare Repertory Theater is probably the very spot where my father decided to hightail it down to the University of Illinois and change his focus. Fortunately for my brother and me, it was also the place he met his best friend, Uncle Jack Lieberman, who would set my father and my mother up on a blind date that became a marriage of over 50 years and yielded my brother, yours truly, and our respective families and 5 grandchildren. When my mom came into the picture at the U of I, she recognized my father's talent, and she supported him through law school at Northwestern. Again, my father was the product of a bygone era. I can't recall the mismatch, but either his grades were on the low side and he tested really well, or his grades outpaced his testing scores. But for whatever reason, he landed an in-person interview at Northwestern, and the admissions director was puzzled by the inconsistency in my father's academic record. My father was always gifted in his power of persuasion, and when the admissions director remarked, "We could let you in here, but you would literally be the last in your class," my father simply replied, "Well, somebody's got to be." This inauspicious beginning at Northwestern Law led to a distinguished career as one of Chicago's preeminent construction attorneys, and as his colleagues knew him, the dean of the newly forged American College of Construction Lawyers. Dad's colleague, mentee, and friend, Josh Levitt, wrote a touching bereavement email to their colleagues in the college that left me and my brother in tears. In it, he wrote, I had a front seat to the way that Stan practiced law. Maybe details weren't his strength, and in our initial years together, the details did fall to me. But he had this enormous ability to see the forest through the trees, to size up people and situations and achieve great results for his clients. And when he had to, he exercised his craft with great precision and skill. I'll never forget the day he cross-examined Lev Zetlin, one of the premier engineering expert witnesses of his time. Stan did not suffer fools, but he killed them with kindness and wit instead of combativeness and sarcasm. Josh went on to explain what our father meant to him, and I've seen firsthand through the years the real connection they both shared. I know he was a father figure to you, Josh. And believe me, the love and affection, it was mutual. It didn't need to be overtly stated to be seen and felt. Dad was a gifted teacher and mentor, and even in his supposed retirement years, when offered, I hope I'm getting this right, he jumped at the chance to teach law at DePaul, right? DePaul. Steve wanted to highlight our father's sense of service. Service to something as mundane as Little League. He coached our teams, sponsored by Dairy Queen. And even though we were the Bad News Bears, he taught us the value of teamwork and commitment. Service to this congregation, as Cantor alluded to. He guided Bigsby on many legal issues over the years, including the move to Deerfield and the construction of this beautiful synagogue in which we now sit. I believe at some point, I don't think he was part of that Torah parade down Milwaukee Avenue, but, come high holidays, or when it was time to officially, inaugurate the Ark, he was one of the Torah holders, and he took great pride in that. Service to the legal profession. He represented the Northbrook Park District. He was on Northbrook's Zoning Board of Appeals for many years. He participated in the founding of the Society of Illinois Construction Attorneys and the aforementioned American College of Construction Lawyers, for which he served a term as president. Steve could relate to my father on a professional level. I understood none of it. I knew he was an expert in concrete, and concrete pours gone bad. I hope I'm getting all that right. There was a case that brought us together in New York City, and I looked forward to every visit, and not just because I was a starving actor and he would take me out for a good steak at Smith and Walensky. He was working on a big case for the Austrian Cultural Forum building on East 52nd. Josh knows that case well. It lasted a long time. It's a shoebox of a building, right? With an extremely narrow footprint and a facade vaguely reminiscent of those statues on Easter Island. Apparently, the cement pour for the building was shoddy, and the construction firm and the architect were pointing fingers at each other, and the lawsuit was for an eye-watering amount of money. I loved that lawsuit because it kept my father coming to the city on a regular basis. But I told my dad to be careful because even though he was a big shot in Chicago, he was now dealing with a New Jersey concrete outfit, and I didn't want him to end up with concrete shoes in the East River. The best part of those visits were the dinners with his Austrian clients who adored my father and by extension took an interest in me and my theatrical and cantorial pursuits. One night, I was walking him back to the hotel, and I decided it was time to get real with my father. All kidding aside, I needed him to know something powerful and profound. I said, Dad, did you ever stop to think that your father lamented his lack of education his whole life, and he felt that it held him back? And yet here, your son is going back to school in his 30s, spending a great deal of time and money to learn the Jewish knowledge that your father knew like he knew how to breathe. Don't you think it's a bit ironic? He paused for a moment. He considered what I had to say, and he simply replied, I never thought about it like that, but I guess so. He didn't cry. My father was pretty stoic. He just gave me that look that said, you done good, kid. You done good. But to understand our father's rosebud, the unattainable piece of childhood lost, we can't simply rattle off a list of our father's professional accolades, and there were many. Of course he was proud of his achievements, considering where he came from. It is nothing short of miraculous. I don't know when this episode happened, and maybe Linda has a better recollection of how it all went down. But the gist of it is this. my father caught wind of a present my grandmother was going to give him. It was a bag he wanted, a briefcase he coveted. I know it sounds silly, but trust me and my brother when we say this had a profound impact on our father. Before he received the bag of his dreams, our grandmother found out that he had been bragging about it to his friends before ever having received the gift. As a life lesson and a bit of tough love, she reneged on the gift and returned the bag to the store. Silly, right? It was only a bag after all. No. This was my father's rosebud moment. It created in him a lifelong obsession with bags, with luggage. This is the God's honest truth. Our basement crawl space was like a literal luggage store. Am I right, Ava? The briefcase my father never got resulted in a lifetime of bags. Dad filled our house with bags of every size for every occasion under the sun, from the smallest man purse to the largest oversized bag you could get on a plane. If our grandmother lived through the Great Depression, our father lived through his own Great Depression, owing to his bag deprivation and the humiliation of having to admit that the gift he bragged about went back to the department store unopened. There's a through line here. Our grandfather lamented his lack of education. Our father felt stripped of his briefcase and the badge of his profession. Growing up, my brother and I wanted for nothing, and never was that more apparent than at a bookstore, right, Steve? Didn't matter the genre or topic, cookbook, pulp fiction, or Dad's favorite American history. If there was a book we wanted, it was ours. Just put it on top of the pile of books that my father was buying for himself. He and my mother were voracious readers. She was an English teacher, after all, and a fine writer in her own right, pun intended. Our father's penchant was for World War II history. It was second only to his rosebud obsession with bags, and he and my mother finally fulfilled a lifelong dream of visiting the beaches at Normandy in France and witnessing firsthand the sand and the soil of D-Day. It was a moving experience that left my father, a man of words, utterly speechless. Dad's army service fell somewhere between the Korean War and Vietnam, but he felt a tremendous debt of gratitude to the soldiers that fought and died for our freedom, especially those that fought and fell to the Nazis. And he knew that he had a cushy post during peacetime as a medic who helped out with bumps and bruises at an army base stateside. Thankfully, that was the only action he ever saw. Our father was a great storyteller. He loved to tell the one about his staff sergeant from the Deep South who was suspicious of the 2 Jews in the barracks who asked for leave to observe the Jewish high holy days. Now, you boys enjoy your Rosh Hashanah, and I better not hear you or anywhere else but that Jewish church. Dad was a jokester with a quick wit and the gift of gab. He had sayings, as we heard, they've become legendary to my brother and to the grandchildren. Illegitimi non carborundum. Don't let the bastards wear you down. Wait a minute, I just have to put you on speaker. I got you on speaker. Daniel, aren't you embarrassed to be seen in that hat? Sam, you sure do like to live life on the edge. And anytime my father would take a trip, upon arriving, he would immediately check in with me and my brother with his nod to the Apollo landing. Hey, Steve, the Eagle has landed. It didn't matter how many times he said these words. The telling and the retelling made the joke that much funnier. Like when he didn't want you to know how much something really cost. We heard it 3 times already. It was $1.380. Or his physical comedy and a surefire hit with the toddler set. Little physical gag. It would captivate a kid every time. He was really a kid at heart, and he had that naughty twinkle in his eye that brought you in on the joke and let you know that you were a part of the team. When Shira and I started dating, my father famously said, welcome to the family, Shira. The funniest part of this bit is that he never stopped saying it. A decade into our marriage, he was still saying, welcome to the family, Shira. And it became a punchline for us, like an inside joke, a way of acknowledging our crazy, obsessive, weird, wonderful families and their quirks. I don't say it often enough, and certainly not in a public forum, but I couldn't. I wouldn't be standing here now delivering these words were it not for Shira's unconditional love and support, most especially during this, the worst year of my life. Thank you hardly seems sufficient, but thank you. Our father was a pipe smoker for many years. It was a distinguished look for a lawyer, and I'll always remember the pipe rack on his desk at home, the scales of justice, that clay barrister statue with the curled wig. When the time came for us to clear out the basement in Northbrook, a flood of memory came rushing back. The smell of the tobacco carefully pressed into the wooden bowl of his pipe, the old Army fatigues and helmet, the model trains and the smell of burned wire insulation, old cameras and boxes and boxes and boxes of slides. My great hope for AI is that it will help with the unenviable task of going through literally thousands and thousands of old family photos and making some sense of it for our children. I feel as though I've given a backdrop of who Stanley was without ever addressing the essence of him. He literally pulled himself up by the bootstraps and became the man he always dreamed he could be. And he was a father without peer. The 5:48 was his train, and you could set your clock by the constancy of the minute he would walk through the door, ascend the stairs, change out of his suit, and settle in for a family meal at our 1960s white rounded kitchen table right out of a Stanley Kubrick film, with its attendant tomato and mustard Herman Miller swivel chairs, which my brother and I put through their paces, spinning around. My brother brought up his fond memories of getting to go downtown, visit Dad at the office, and the smell of the giant Xerox machine at Mann, Kogan, Sklar, and Lerman. The Bon-Ton pastry shop would cap off a magical day of seeing what Dad did down there in the Loop. And my mother was his wingwoman. She was a dutiful wife. Our parents were the living embodiment of a 1950s television sitcom, and we were lucky enough to be their sons, to be the fulfillment of their dreams of having a family. We didn't know of their struggles with fertility and having children at all. You simply didn't talk about those things. We knew our mother was a thyroid cancer survivor and that she had her thyroid removed in her early 20s, but the full extent of her medical woes was largely shielded from us. We were the children of immigrants, living out the American dream in the suburbs of Chicago, the last diaspora of the Jews of the South Side. Much respect and love to our dear family friend Michael Price, a fellow South Sider and one of my mother's closest friends from childhood. I hope you're watching. Are you beginning to understand the DNA from which we were forged? Polish immigrants who fled an infamous town called Jedwabne, the site of a hideous massacre brought about by Poles murdering Poles with little goading from the Germans. On to the promise of the Golden Land and the Lower East Side, to Brooklyn, to Chicago, to Champaign-Urbana, to Northbrook, and an office with a view on Wacker Drive. This was our father's upward trajectory, and there was no earthly way he was going to come down. These past months haven't been easy, but they pale in comparison to the ordeal our mother endured, and for that, I am truly grateful. Thank you to Dad's aide, Bozina, who was with him through thick and thin these past few years. I'm grateful beyond words to my brother for taking such good care of our father, even when he could be a nudge and a pain, and he wanted to know your travel itinerary down to the minute. He was famous for making his own wallet-sized itineraries for quick reference. And if you knew my father, you knew it was entirely plausible that he might have actually entered 1:05 to 1:25 p.m., time for a little schluff. A nap for those non-Yiddish speakers. He was a complicated man, my father. And yes, he was obsessive. But he had every reason to be that way. And he overcame obstacles that would have stopped others in their tracks. The respect of his peers meant the world to him, and his office was lined with awards from his professional accomplishments. The college was his extended family, and we appreciate the love you've shown our family. To his sister Linda, I know it wasn't always the easiest relationship, and I'm sure the age gap didn't help. You were almost a generation apart, and the loss of your father at such a young age cemented our dad's role as both brother and father in a way. But he loved you as the cherished daughter of your parents' dreams, and our sympathies are with you and Sarah today as well. Dad's friendships were lifelong, and he was fiercely loyal. I'm looking around the room. I'm seeing faces that are just indelible to me. Faces from the Burke's pool parties, the Basses. I don't want to name everybody, the Hirsch's. I'm looking around the room, and these are just faces. This is home for me. In some ways, I felt like I went to the East Coast, and maybe in a way I abandoned Chicago, but I come back here and I see old friends and family, and it's home. It's home. My brother and I have fond memories of road trips to Camp Shy in Wisconsin, and of our CB radio squawking car caravan with the Burkes. Alan's CB handle was the Great Pumpkin, and Dad was Stony Swan. Remember that, Dave? Stony Swan. It was hilarious to hear the two of them joking around while actual truckers didn't realize that these weekend warriors were on their channel. The stories are endless, even if Dad's time on earth was not. When our biblical patriarch Joseph pulled himself up by the bootstraps and became second in command of all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself, he had but one request of his sons. It's a lesson he learned from his father Jacob as he reached the end of his days. What was the ask? When I die, bury me with my ancestors back in the old country, the land of my people, my landsmen. My father's Brooklyn only exists in memory. But when we tell the stories, we bring the old country alive again. It lives in us. It's the very fabric of our existence. And to Sam, Ava, Ari, Isaac, and Jonah, we may mock the things we are to be, but when we say these words, these very words, we honor your grandfather. We say it with a smile and a wink, and I hope you feel your grandfather smiling right back at you, filled with pride at the living legacy that is his grandchildren. To our father, Stanley, or Stosh, as he was known to his nearest and dearest, we leave you with the words of your own mother, words that accompanied us whenever we left, words that assured us of our safe return. Gegezond Pap. We can never fully thank you for all you've given us, but we'll spend the rest of our days trying to pay it forward. Steve wrote these words that speak to the legacy our father left behind. Dad, all of us here today, as well as many who are no longer with us, we're truly blessed to have you as a role model. You were a role model as a child, a spouse, a parent, a coach, a colleague, a mentor, and so much more. We should only be so lucky to live a life as full as yours. Being like you is nothing to mock. It is something to strive for. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Adonai rohi lo echsar, Adonai bin hote sheyarbitzeni, al menuchot על מי מנוחות ינעלני.
נפשי ישובב ישובב ינחני במעגלי צדק ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו.
גם כי אלך בגץ על מוות לא ירא כי אתה עמדי.
שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפניי שולחן נגד צורריי ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה.
שבתי בבית אדוני
לאורך ימים.
אדוני רואי לא אחסר.
אדוני רואי לא אחסר.
Kohelet wrote, "The eye never has its fill of seeing. Young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world. They never complete their task. They never cherish their loved ones enough before they are called home. How they yearn for yet another respite from the final summons, and how we yearn to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, yet another joy, yet another precious moment together. God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this moment. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing." I'll now invite you all to rise as we recite El Maleh Rachamim, which is the transliteration can be found on the inside here.
מלא רחמים
שוכן במרומי. המצי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה. עם קירושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע. מזהירי לנשמת ישראל פנחס בן חיים הלוי ורבקה שהלכה לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר Amen. Fully compassionate God on high, grant perfect peace under your wings to Stanley Paul Sklar, our loved one who has entered eternity, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold him in the embrace of your wings, secure his soul in eternity. Adonai, he is yours. He will rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen.
Amen.
This concludes our service here at the synagogue. The family plot at Shalom will be the interment immediately taking place. For those joining the family procession, well before me, just outside the synagogue parking lot. If you're planning on joining the procession, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker, which can be placed on the inside portion of your windshield. For an additional measure of safety, our staff will be placing magnetic flags on the rooftop portions of your vehicle. While in the procession, please make sure your bright lights and hazard lights are on at all times, and please drive as closely to the car in front of you as safety permits. Please avoid talking on your cellular phone while en route to the cemetery. Upon return from the cemetery, the family will be sitting Shiva here, Congregation B'nai Joshua Beth Elohim, from 1 to 3 p.m. this afternoon, as well as on Wednesday, Thursday, both at Tamarisk and at a place in Chicago. That information, as well as some of the other information regarding Thursday Shiva, is on the folder. If you're watching this on the broadcast, that information is on the funeral home website. Memorial contributions in Mr. Sklar's memory can be made to Temple Shalom. That information is on the folder as well as on the funeral home website. The following individuals have been asked to serve as pallbearers. When I call your name, if you could please rise and stand just over here next to Mr. Sklar's casket. Josh Silverman, Ian Warren, Sam Sklar, Sam Tatel, David Burke, and Josh Levitt. At this time, if I could ask everyone to please rise as we escort the casket, the family, and the clergy from the synagogue. Thank you.